Welcome to the Right News Network.
Hello and welcome. I'm Emma with the headlines that matter most right now. U.S. and Iran are trading fire in the Persian Gulf tonight. President Trump says the ceasefire is still holding, but the picture on the water tells a very different story. Our Middle East correspondent, Layla Nazari, is following developments. Layla, what happened today?
Yeah, Emma. So Thursday saw the most serious clashes since the ceasefire began. The U.S. says it intercepted Iranian attacks and struck back at military targets. Iran's completely rejecting that account. They're saying Washington targeted their vessels and hit coastal areas without any provocation. And look, this is significant because we're seeing these two sides literally tell opposite versions of the same event, which is historically how these situations escalate.
Trump keeps saying the ceasefire is still on. Does anybody believe that?
That's the tension right now, Emma. Trump's pushing both sides to finalize a formal agreement, pressuring Iran especially to sign fast, as he put it. But on the ground in the Persian Gulf, what I'm hearing from shipping operators and regional analysts is a lot of anxiety. You've got 20,000 seafarers trapped there because the Strait's effectively closed. Oil prices are spiking. The ceasefire exists on paper, but it's clearly fraying. And if we see another incident like today, I think we're looking at a completely different situation.
How much time do they actually have to make this work?
Weeks, not months. Every naval engagement raises the stakes. Each side's domestic audience expects a response. The risk, frankly, is that one miscalculation, one commander making a wrong call, pushes this from a contained ceasefire into something much bigger. And that's what keeps officials up at night.
Layla, thanks for the reporting. Still on world trade. Tonight, the Trump administration is 0 for 2 in federal court. A trade judge has now blocked a second round of tariffs, this time the 10% levy on nearly all imports that Trump ordered just last month. The Supreme Court already struck down his first tariff attempt. What we're seeing is a pattern. Trump tries to impose broad tariffs by executive order. Courts say he doesn't have the legal authority to do it. And that matters, because right now he's threatening even steeper tariffs on the European Union unless they accept a trade deal by July 4th. But if courts keep blocking his tariff orders, his leverage in those negotiations just keeps slipping away. Remaining with world affairs, we're watching military strikes intensify on multiple fronts tonight. Russia pounding Ukrainian cities with drone attacks, while the United States hits Iranian targets. Layla, good to have you back. What's driving this sudden escalation?
Yeah, Emma. And the timing here is significant. What I'm hearing from defense officials is that both Moscow and Washington have essentially decided that diplomacy isn't moving fast enough. On the Ukraine side, Russia's shifted strategy entirely. They're not trying to take ground anymore. They're trying to exhaust Ukrainian air defenses through sheer volume. It's attrition warfare. And meanwhile, in the Persian Gulf region, these Iranian attacks on U.S. side warships have pushed Washington past the diplomatic phase into direct military response.
So we're looking at two different wars suddenly getting hotter at the same time.
That's exactly right. And frankly, Emma, the overlap is what worries regional experts I've been speaking with. You've got Russia and the U.S., both signaling they're willing to absorb diplomatic costs for military advantage. That changes the entire calculation. When superpowers stop worrying about what negotiations might look like, when they're prepared to take direct military action, that's when you see windows for de-escalation actually close.
Layla Nazari with us from the region. Thank you. Still on world affairs, tensions in the Persian Gulf just reached a breaking point. American warships came under fire from Iran, and the U.S. fired back. Marcus Webb, our Washington correspondent, has the latest on what this means for talks that were supposed to be happening. Marcus, how serious is this?
Yeah, Emma. This is a significant moment. What we're seeing is a direct military confrontation that threatens to unravel the ceasefire framework entirely. 3 Navy destroyers were attacked while moving through the Strait of Hormuz yesterday, and the U.S. responded with strikes on 2 Iranian ports. I was speaking to a senior defense official this morning who described it as a tit-for-tat dynamic that's spiraling. And frankly, that language from the Pentagon is telling.
But Trump says he still wants a deal. How do you square that with military strikes?
Look, the administration's position is that these are defensive actions, not escalations designed to kill diplomacy. They're saying we're protecting our assets, and if Iran wants to talk, the door's open. But here's what's striking to me. Iran's now claiming it controls shipping in the Persian Gulf. That's a direct challenge to American interests and to global energy security. When you've got that kind of positioning from Tehran, military incidents stop looking like isolated events and start looking like the opening moves of something much larger.
Marcus, appreciate it. Remaining with world news, Al-Qaeda-linked militants in Mali just claimed responsibility for attacks that killed more than 30 people in a single day. This isn't an isolated incident. It's the latest in a series of coordinated assaults hammering the West African nation. Marcus, you've been tracking these groups for years. What's changed?
Yeah, Emma. What's significant here is the scale and coordination. JNIM. This is the Al-Qaeda affiliate we're talking about. They're demonstrating real operational sophistication. 2 attacks on the same day, multiple targets. That takes planning. I was speaking to a Sahel security analyst this morning who described it as a show of force. They're not just trying to kill people, they're trying to prove they're still a major player in the region.
Why now? Is Mali's government losing ground?
Look, Mali's in a precarious position. You've got a government that's increasingly isolated internationally, Russian contractors on the ground, and extremist groups that have had years to entrench themselves. JNIM sees an opening. The military's busy fighting political battles at home and abroad. It's a vacuum, frankly, and these groups know how to exploit it.
Marcus, thanks for the context. Moving to business now, and a major problem just got bigger. China controls the rare earths we need. Trump was counting on fixing that with Xi, but the Persian Gulf just got in the way.
Yeah, Emma. And this is significant because the timing couldn't be worse for Washington. I was speaking to a senior official this morning who told me the summit was supposed to be about supply chain resilience, about breaking China's grip on these materials. But now, Iran, the Persian Gulf tensions, that's consuming the bandwidth. The rare earths conversation that was supposed to anchor the whole meeting is getting pushed down the agenda.
How much leverage does that give Beijing?
Look, substantial leverage. China produces about 80% of the world's processed rare earths. When you control something that's critical to defense and tech, and suddenly the other side is distracted by a regional crisis, you don't rush to the negotiating table. Beijing knows Washington's got immediate problems. That's worth something.
James Chen, thanks. Thousands of schools and universities went dark today, literally. The Canvas learning platform that millions of students rely on shut down this morning after a cyber attack. Hackers claiming to be shiny hunters say they breached the system again and are threatening to leak student data, names, emails, ID numbers, private messages. Right now, students can't access grades or turn in assignments. Teachers can't grade work, and schools are scrambling to figure out exactly what was stolen and how to tell parents about it. The energy crisis that nearly broke Europe 5 years ago is reshaping how the entire world powers itself right now. Across the continent, consumers are racing to install solar panels and heat pumps. And in Taiwan, the company that makes chips for all your devices is making a massive bet on wind power. What's driving it? Simple. They're terrified of being caught without power when the next crisis hits. And if TSMC moves, everyone else follows. Tonight, how a fear of future blackouts is rewriting the global energy playbook. Australia's cracking down hard on citizens who fled to fight with ISIS. 3 women just hit with charges including crimes against humanity. We're learning more tonight about what they're accused of and why this matters beyond Sydney. Joining us now from our international desk, Alex Park, our new technology correspondent, covering this story. Alex, these women, they actually came back to Australia. Why are they only being charged now?
Yeah, Emma, and that's the critical detail here. These 3 women returned from Syria after ISIS lost its territorial control in the Persian Gulf region and across the broader Middle East. The delay in charges reflects how long Australian authorities have been building cases against them. What I'm hearing from sources inside federal police is that the investigation involved piecing together evidence from multiple jurisdictions: Syria, Iraq, intelligence partners overseas. It's not straightforward. The 2 facing crimes against humanity charges are accused of direct involvement in slavery, which is frankly one of the most serious allegations Australia can bring.
How does Australia even prove that in a Syrian conflict zone?
Look, that's where this gets complicated. The prosecution has to establish direct knowledge and participation, not just presence. I was speaking to a legal analyst this morning who told me Australian authorities are relying heavily on witness testimony, documentation seized from ISIS-controlled areas, and intelligence intercepts. The evidentiary standard is high, but the cases wouldn't have been charged unless prosecutors believed they could meet it.
Alex, appreciate the detail on this one. Moving to us now, a Georgia man's facing federal charges tonight for posting death threats against 2 Trump cabinet members. The indictment against him is part of a broader pattern we're seeing of escalating threats against government officials on social media. And still with Alex, this is becoming a law enforcement problem. What's driving this surge?
Yeah, Emma. Look, what we're seeing here is the intersection of 3 things. You've got platforms that make posting easier than ever. You've got an intensely polarized political environment. And frankly, law enforcement is finally treating these seriously, actually prosecuting them federally instead of letting them sit. The indictment tells us prosecutors found these threats cross the line from speech to genuine threat. That's a high bar legally. So the fact that Georgia went federal with this, that signals they believe there's real criminal conduct here.
But where's the line between protected speech and a criminal threat?
That's the question every prosecutor grapples with. And I'll be honest, it's murky. Courts require what they call an imminent lawless action. Just saying, "I hate you," or even general violent rhetoric, that's protected. But specific, detailed threats of violence that a reasonable person would interpret as a genuine intent to harm, that crosses it. What we don't know yet is exactly what this person posted, but the fact that it was deemed gruesome and warrant a 4-count indictment tells us prosecutors believed it met that threshold.
These are cabinet-level targets now.
Exactly, and that changes the calculus. Noem at Homeland Security, Bondi as Attorney General. They're not just politicians anymore, in the traditional sense. They're overseeing law enforcement and security operations. Threats against them are treated as potential threats to government function itself. That's why you're seeing the federal machinery activate. Expect to see more of these cases, Emma. Prosecutors have the tools, and they're using them.
Alex Park, thank you.
Time to go deeper. Beyond the headlines, our full analysis of the story shaping the world right now.
The Strait of Hormuz is on fire, or close enough to it to matter. American and Iranian forces have exchanged fire in one of the most strategically critical waterways on the planet. Oil prices have jumped, 20,000 seafarers are stranded in the Persian Gulf, and President Trump is simultaneously declaring the ceasefire still in effect while warning Tehran to sign a deal, and fast. The FTSE 100 tumbled, Brent crude surged, and the entire global energy market is holding its breath. Joining me now are Alex Park, our technology and science analyst, and Layla Nazari, our Middle East analyst. Alex, let me start with you. Is Trump's ceasefire is still in effect line a masterclass in strategic ambiguity, or is it just wishful thinking from a White House that doesn't want to admit this situation is spinning out of control?
Thanks, Emma. Look, I'll tell you exactly what it is. It's Trump doing what no American president has had the nerve to do since Reagan, holding maximum pressure while keeping the door theoretically open. The US military confirmed it intercepted Iranian attacks and struck back at military targets. That's not a violation of a ceasefire. That's self-defense against a regime that has been in a state of undeclared war with the West since 1979. The National Review this week asked whether Taco Tuesday has finally come to Iran, meaning, is Iran actually close to cracking under pressure? And I think the honest answer is possibly yes, but only if America doesn't blink first. Ben Shapiro has been right about this for years. Strength deters, weakness invites aggression, and every time the West has shown Iran a soft underbelly, Tehran has bitten it. What concerns me is the Europeans, who are already whispering about de-escalation pathways and multilateral frameworks, which is diplomatic code for giving Iran time to enrich more uranium while we pretend we're making progress. Trump calling Iranian strikes a love tap might sound reckless, but it signals something important. America isn't scared, and Iran's military capabilities, while real, are not existential threats to a fully committed United States.
But Alex, isn't there a danger that Trump's dismissive framing, love tap, ceasefire, still in effect while ships are being targeted, actually undermines American credibility? If this is a love tap, what happens when Iran decides to throw a real punch? And Layla, what's your take on this?
Well, look, I think Alex is making the strategic case correctly, but missing the economic catastrophe that's already unfolding in the background. We have 20,000 seafarers stranded in the Persian Gulf right now, 20,000 real people. The Strait of Hormuz carries roughly 21 million barrels of oil per day. That's a fifth of global petroleum consumption. Brent crude is already jumping on the back of this week's exchanges, and the FTSE 100 has tumbled even as peace deal hopes provided some counterpressure. The market is genuinely terrified, and it's right to be terrified. My concern isn't Trump's rhetoric. Honestly, I think the love tap framing is calculated to project dominance without escalating. My concern is that Iran's economy is under enormous strain from sanctions. Their rial has collapsed, inflation is brutal, and a desperate regime is the most dangerous kind. A cornered theocracy with 60 to 84% uranium enrichment levels and a restless population is not a rational actor in the classical sense. The risk of miscalculation in that strait is not theoretical, it is present and immediate.
I hear what Layla is saying, but with respect, that analysis risks becoming the same cautious hand-wringing that gave us the JCPOA. Yes, a cornered regime is dangerous, but a regime that has been allowed to enrich uranium to near weapons-grade levels because the West kept finding reasons not to push back, that is existentially dangerous. Iran closer to a nuclear breakout than at any point in history. We're talking weeks to months on some intelligence estimates. Iran's nuclear timeline was measured in years a decade ago. A year, that's the trajectory. And I'll tell you what really frustrates me. The same European foreign ministries that championed the Obama-era deal, that gave Iran sanctions relief it used to fund Hezbollah and the Houthis, are now lecturing Trump about proportionality. John Kerry's legacy is a Middle East that is more dangerous, not less. Douglas Murray has nailed this. The West's assumption that ideological enemies would simply moderate if given economic incentives was one of the great intellectual failures of the post-Cold War era. Iran is the proof.
Here's what I want to know, and I want both of you to answer this honestly. The ceasefire is fragile, Iran is enriching uranium, oil markets are spooked, and 20,000 seafarers are caught in the middle. Where does this actually go? Layla, where do you see this playing out in the next 30 to 60 days?
The way I see this playing out, there are really only two viable exits from this corridor and one dead end. The first exit is that Trump's maximum pressure actually works. Iran's economy cannot absorb a sustained confrontation. The regime calculates that a deal is less painful than the alternative, and we get something resembling a genuine agreement. That's possible. The second exit is a genuine hot war triggered by miscalculation. One incident in the Strait that neither side intended to be the trigger point, but which becomes one anyway. History tells us the Strait of Hormuz tanker wars of the 1980s started exactly like this. The dead end, and the one I fear most, is Iran using these negotiations to buy time, continuing to enrich and emerging from this crisis closer to a nuclear weapon than when it entered. That's not peace. That's a ticking clock.
Here's what concerns me most, and this goes beyond the immediate military picture. Iran's regime has survived 45 years by outlasting Western resolve. Every American administration has eventually looked for an exit ramp. The question isn't whether Trump can apply maximum pressure, He clearly can and is. The question is whether the American political system will sustain that pressure long enough to actually change Iranian behavior. The regime in Tehran is betting it won't. They're betting on Western fatigue. And if they're right, if this ceasefire becomes a face-saving off-ramp that lets Iran resume enrichment in 6 months under some fig leaf agreement, then we will have handed the Islamic Republic the most dangerous thing possible, more time, and the lesson that America blinks.
Extraordinary analysis from both of you. Alex Park, Layla Nazari, thank you. One thing is certain tonight. Somewhere in Tehran, someone is calculating exactly how long American patience lasts, and the entire world's energy supply is riding on whether they've done the maths right. Three passengers are dead. A British crew member urgently needs medical care. The CDC has declared a level 3 emergency response, and passengers from the infected cruise ship MV Hondius are already home, scattered across 5 American states before most people even knew there was an outbreak. Tonight, the world is asking hard questions about how a deadly hantavirus outbreak was allowed to disperse globally before authorities even knew what they were dealing with. Joining me now are Sophia Reeves, our economics and markets editor, and James Chen, our geopolitical analyst. Sophia, let me start with you. Is the international health system fundamentally broken? Or are we looking at an outbreak that has actually been managed reasonably well?
Thanks, Emma. Look, let's be honest about what managed reasonably well means in this context. 3 people are dead, passengers are spread across 5 states with no guarantee they weren't exposed, and the WHO's opening response was essentially, "Don't panic, this isn't COVID." That is not reassurance. That is institutional damage control. The WHO's credibility on early outbreak management has been in tatters since 2020, when they spent the critical early weeks of COVID deferring to Beijing rather than protecting the world. Now they're telling us hantavirus spreads differently, and we should all calm down. They're probably right on the science, but probably right isn't good enough when you're talking about a pathogen with a case fatality rate of 30 to 40%. What this outbreak reveals is that sovereign national governments, the CDC, the UK Health Security Agency, Argentine health authorities, were essentially reactive. They were waiting for information to filter through an international system that moves at the speed of diplomacy, not the speed of a virus. And the uncomfortable truth is that passengers were already home in Texas and California before anyone declared a level 3 emergency.
But Sophia, isn't that precisely what the monitoring system is designed to handle? The passengers are being watched, none are showing symptoms, and the WHO is right that hantavirus doesn't spread person to person the way COVID does. Isn't this actually the system working? And James, what's your take on this?
Well, look, I think Sophia is making an important point about institutional speed, but I'd push back on the framing. Here's what the data actually shows. Hantavirus pulmonary syndrome has a horrific fatality rate, yes, but it requires direct contact with infected rodent material to transmit in almost every documented case. The exception, and this is critical, is the Andes strain, which circulates in Argentina and which has shown limited human-to-human transmission in rare documented instances. So the question isn't just, is the WHO reassuring us correctly? The question is, do we know which strain this is? Do we know the precise exposure pathway? Argentina is the world's highest incidence country for hantavirus by WHO metrics. The ship departed from Argentina. These aren't coincidences. They're data points that should have triggered faster screening protocols the moment anyone presented with symptoms on board. What I'd argue is that the system isn't broken, but the speed of the system's decision-making is. And in public health, speed is everything.
I hear what James is saying, but with respect, that misses the point entirely. Yes, in an ideal world, we'd have perfect information about the strain before making decisions. But governments don't have the luxury of waiting for complete epidemiological data. They have to act on incomplete information in real time. 7 people confirmed or suspected infected, 3 dead, a case fatality rate north of 30%, and passengers were allowed to disperse internationally? Come on. If this were a terror threat with those parameters, 7 suspected cases, 30% lethality, you'd have borders locked down within hours. But because it's a virus, because it requires deference to the WHO, because nobody wants to be accused of overreacting, Governments sat on their hands. That's the failure. It's not the science, it's the political will. And I'm sorry, but right now the political will in international health governance is determined by who can avoid embarrassing the institution, not who can protect the public fastest.
Here's what I want to know. Argentina is at the center of this investigation, and they haven't confirmed the exposure source yet. If they can't pin it down, what does that mean for the people currently being monitored in Texas, Georgia, Virginia, Arizona, and California? James, where do you see this going?
The way I see this playing out, if Argentina establishes a clear point source exposure on land, a specific location where rodent contact occurred during shore activities, then this closes relatively cleanly. The monitored passengers ride out their surveillance window, remain asymptomatic, and the international health system breathes a collective sigh of relief. But if Argentina can't establish that point source, then the trajectory suggests a prolonged period of uncertainty that is genuinely dangerous. Not because hantavirus is about to become a pandemic, it almost certainly isn't, but because unexplained outbreak origins create the conditions for poor policy responses. You get overcorrection in some areas and underreaction in others. And in those gaps, people get hurt. Watch for Argentina's investigative timeline. If they haven't confirmed a source within the next 2 weeks, the questions get significantly harder.
Here's what concerns me most. It's not the immediate outbreak. It's the precedent. Expedition cruises to Antarctica are a booming industry. They operate in remote locations, they interact with local environments that have genuinely elevated pathogen risks, and then they return hundreds of passengers to international travel hubs. If the international community takes away from this, that the system basically worked, they will not implement the tougher pre-departure screening and post-voyage surveillance protocols that are clearly needed. The risk here is institutional complacency. 3 people died on one ship. The next expedition might carry more passengers. The next strain might have different transmission dynamics. What history tells us is that the window between contained event and preventable catastrophe is often only as wide as the lessons governments actually learn and actually implement.
Sophia Reeves, James Chen, a sobering conversation. One thing is certain. Somewhere in the Argentine Health Ministry tonight, there's a scientist who knows that the world is waiting for their answer, and that whatever they find may either close this story permanently or blow it wide open.
That wraps up today's top stories. I'm Emma. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.